Hi, students of SLIS740. My name is Brent Appling, and I am the Mass Media and Social Sciences Librarian at the Thomas Cooper Library. Dr. Tu Kiefner has been very gracious in inviting me to speak with you all about accessing and utilizing business and news-related resources. We will look at tools that you can access via the Thomas Cooper Library, as well as some that are freely available online. To fulfill the learning objectives of learning these business and news-related systems, let's use the following scenario. Let's say you are a reference librarian who has been asked to consult with a small group of business students to help them research the solar energy industry. They must identify leading companies in the industry, identify one top company, preferably the one with the highest profit and/or market share. The students then need to be able to access their chosen company's financial information, identify key people in the company, identify competitors, and explore the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats the company may be facing now or in the future. The students have been told that they will need to use business databases, but that they also will need to see if there have been any news reports on their chosen company and on the solar industry in general. There are several ways that you can approach this, and it is important to know what resources you have at your disposal. In this case, the best starting point will be the Thomas Cooper Library's website. From here, we know the students need to find company and industry information, so a likely starting point would be the Articles and Databases link. From the following page, it's quite obvious that business would be the most likely subject from the list of subject areas. And on the following page, you get a rather exhaustive list of all the business-related databases that are available by subscription through the Thomas Cooper Library, plus anything freely available online that has been identified and deemed helpful and reliable by Thomas Cooper's business librarian. So you'll see that there are some top databases listed. Looking at the description of each product, though, is going to be essential when dealing with business and industry databases, as each product can function very differently. And in this case, as a generalist librarian, you may not know the best starting points yourself, so descriptions and of course trial and error will be essential to your success in this scenario. So just judging from the ranking of the databases, a ranking that is curated by Thomas Cooper's research and business librarians, let's start with Business Source Complete. Once here, you may be tempted just to see what's out there. Are there articles or reports related to solar energy in this database? So you try a search, maybe for solar industry. A ton of articles come back. However, not a lot of overview info or anything that talks about the industry in general, which I think is what the students here are more interested in. So maybe while still trying to identify top companies and other overview type information on the industry, perhaps this isn't the best place to start, since it looks like a good amount of the content is scholarly journal articles that are going to be a bit more in-depth than what we're looking for at this point. It's still a great resource, and we might circle back to this, but for now, let's try something else. Back on the database list, let's try another one in that top databases section. How about Nexus Uni? It's described as having business publications, so it could be good, right? Once here, you can search for solar, and we'll make sure we are searching within companies. So you get a list of companies, but not much about the industry. You can't tell where each of these companies fall within the industry, for example. So maybe it's time to try something else entirely. Nexus Uni does have great information, it has great company profiles, and it has a slew of news articles, but in this scenario, we might need a little bit of information first off, at least as far as identifying key companies that we might want to then search for. So let's try something a little bit different. Looking down through the list of additional databases, you'll see a wide variety of scopes among the different products. Some provide articles, like we saw in Business Source Complete, some provide advertising data, some provide tax codes, others provide company profiles and directory information. There is one product on the list, however, that specifically mentions including industry reports, EBIS World. Perhaps this would be a great starting point. From here, we might go ahead and do a search for solar. You'll see in our results that there isn't just a solar energy industry, but rather several different related industries. There is one that is listed as solar power in the US, which could be good, so let's take a look. You'll quickly see, however, that there isn't a lot of info on this industry, and I suspect it's because most power grids in the US have not utilized solar enough for it to be considered a major utility, therefore there may not be a lot of industry information available. You'll notice even that there's not a major company involved in this industry. But if you do take a quick look at this industry at a glance page, you do at least get an idea for other industries within the supply chain, such as solar panel manufacturing and steel framing. So it might be a good time to go back to the previous page and select another industry. How about this time we take a look at the solar panel manufacturing industry. In the snapshot for this report, we start to get some more information than what we saw in the last one. The supply chain industries are a bit more robust, and as we scroll down, we get lots of information about the industry in general, including major companies, industry jargon, and more. We find out from this page that one of the major companies for this industry is called First Solar, Inc. To get more in depth with the report, take a look at the links at the top of the page. These will link to further information about each category listed. Let's take a look at the Major Companies tab. Let's take a look at the Major Companies tab. As mentioned before, First Solar, Inc. is really the main company in this industry, controlling about 30% of the industry's market share. As you go through the rest of the page, though, you can get an idea of other companies involved in the industry, such as SolarWorld AG and Suniva. And then, as you go through the rest of the report, there are a lot of other tabs that could help your group of students with understanding the solar panel manufacturing industry, such as the industry outlook, which will give you an idea of the future workings of the industry. It's looking like this one is actually on a decline as far as revenue goes. And then there are just other tabs worth pointing out. Products and markets will give you ideas of the supply chain, demand determinants, all of that good stuff. And it even goes into operating conditions and key statistics that will give you some ideas about the actual industry beyond even just this overview information. So you can see that Evis World then helped a lot with providing industry information and allowed us to identify a top company of the solar panel manufacturing industry, First Solar Incorporated. We were able to get an idea of First Solar's market share and some info on their financials, but that was about it. There are slews of databases that provide more detailed information on specific companies, and since that is part of what the students in this scenario need, let's look for databases that will help with specific company information. So if we were to go back to that top databases list from before where we saw Business Source Complete, Nexus Uni, all that good stuff, there's one other top database listed there that's called Hoover's. Hoover's is a database that provides a broad overview of specific companies. So let's see if we can learn more about First Solar Inc. while in Hoover's. And once you enter it, if you have a company's name like we do, it's easiest to just go ahead and search by that company name as seen in this screenshot. And as you do this, in most cases, you'll even see the company's entry autofill in the search box. Go ahead and click your company if you see it. Once you're on a company's entry page, you start to see info on the company right away. The graph gives you a variety of information, including their current stock performance, and tracks things like major news events related to the company and other happenings like changes in management. As you scroll down that page, you will also see things like a basic company description, what primary industry the company belongs to, latest news on the company, their number of employees, key people within the company, and more. You can of course dive deeper into the company's profile using the tabs across the top of the report, much like we saw in Ibis World. There are some key sections that you would want to highlight in this scenario. One such section is financials, where you can learn about the company's net income was for the previous year, as well as a slew of other financial information. Also using the tab menu, you can identify key competitors by hovering over competition, looking at competitive landscape. You can even look at a competitors list, which even specifically pulls out top competitors for the specific company. And so from this list, you can see that Hanwha Q Cells, Sharp Corp, and Suntech Power are the top competitors for First Solar Incorporated. And if you needed more info on each of those companies, you could do a separate search in Hoover's for each of them. From the tab menu, you can also identify who key people are in the company. And if available, Hoover's even gives you ways to contact key people. So CEO Mark Widmer, for example, can be contacted using this information here. And you even get to see things like compensation, salary, all that good stuff for specific people within companies. Additionally, you also have things like earning estimates, financial market data, stock quotes and charts. And then, of course, we even have news and social, which will give you an idea of how this company is being reflected in certain media. Just keep in mind that Hoover's draws from a really limited amount of sources, and most of them are pretty industry specific. And so you may not get a full snapshot of the company in the news until you search more robust news databases. Now at this point, just with the use of IBIS World and Hoover's, we've been able to find out industry information, identify a top company within a specific industry, research that company to find out financial, personnel, and competition information. So we are well on our way to satisfy the student group's research needs. However, there is one portion that still hasn't been covered, and that's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that the company may currently have. This is something that, based on what we've found, we may be able to suss out. However, in business research, this is actually already a standard practice. It's called a SWOT analysis, and many companies will have this type of analysis available. SWOT analysis can be found back in the first database we looked at, Business Source Complete. Before we get to SWOT, though, I did want to point out how within Business Source Complete, you can find similar company overview information like you did in Hoover's. You can do that by clicking the Company Information tab at the top of the page and then search for your company. This is a much more precise search than earlier when we were just looking for items on the solar industry. The company info provided here is similar to what you may find in Hoover's, but for the sake of due diligence, you might want to look over this when researching a specific company. Now to the SWOT analysis. This is an analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for a particular company. These reports are researched and published by a company called MarketLine. To find these on a particular company, you can either set a limit for SWOT analysis in the limiter section under publication type and then search your company, or quite honestly, you can search your company's name and then add SWOT analysis into the following search box. Either way, if a SWOT analysis is available on your company, it should be listed on the results page. And if there are more than one, they should be listed chronologically from newest to oldest. And as you select your company's SWOT analysis, the latest one that's published, that is, you'll find something like this. And as you go through it, you'll see that it's not very long. They're about 10 pages. They provide a company overview, key facts, and then they get to the SWOT analysis. So the company overview is going to have a lot of the same information that we saw in Hoover's. Make sure those are pretty consistent, just so that you're getting a consistent amount of information. And then you get to the actual analysis. And it gives you a nice breakdown grid of the strength, the opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. And then as you go through, it just breaks out each of those sections with a lot more detail. So for strength, we have vertically integrated operations, a nice explanation of that. As far as weaknesses go, we have fixed price constraints, reliance on third-party suppliers, opportunities, strategic agreements, planned acquisitions, things like that. And then threats, weather conditions. Procurement rules and regulations are going to be a big one. And then it looks like they even say that intense competition is going to happen and be a threat for First Solar Incorporated. So you can get an idea of how useful these SWOT analysis can be when looking at a company within a specific industry. Before we move on to news resources, let's take a look at a couple of freely available business-related resources that might help with this scenario, and will definitely help to add to your quiver of business resource knowledge, especially in case you are ever in a position where you don't have access to the pricey subscription-based resources we've utilized thus far. The two resources that I will highlight here are World Bank and export.gov. Thomas Cooper Library actually provides the link to World Bank data at the very bottom of the Business Resources Databases page, but you can also go directly to data.worldbank.org. In either way, you will have full access without being asked to enter your student login information. The World Bank datasets provide information specifically in relation to living standards across the world. The datasets included in this resource are things like access to different types of energy, such as energy from the coal and oil and gas industries versus energy from renewable resources, for example. So though this database doesn't directly provide specific company or industry information, it does give you access to data on things like consumer prices, debt statistics, consumption of goods, and much more. In the scenario we've been using, the students may want to get a global snapshot of who even uses solar energy to help with explaining potential growth of their chosen company. So within this resource, we could search something like solar energy. But nothing really comes up with that actual indicator. It even says, sorry, no results. So maybe we have to think a little bit broader. What exactly is solar energy, for example? What's something related to it? Well, maybe you can think of something like renewable energy or just renewable sources in general. So even just starting with renewable, and we can get to energy. And as soon as you start typing something in, they're giving you the data sets that might be congruent with your searches. So we see right off the bat, renewable energy consumption. That's the one I'm going to look at. But there are even other ones that could be relatable, such as 2016 Climate Investment Fund scaling up renewable energy program. That might be really interesting to know about in regards to a company that is in the solar energy realm of business. But let's go ahead and look at renewable energy consumption. And this is going to give us an idea of the percentage of total energy consumption that, and the percentage of which is renewable. So from here you get a nice graph, line graph, that's showing you on a whole how much of the world uses renewable energy sources as their main source of energy. And we're getting close to 19-20% or so. And you can change this graph around. Bar graph doesn't really help in this scenario since it's only looking at the world. But then the map is really nice and interesting because you get the percentages of countries, the percentage of use of renewable energies. You can see that the darker sets are anyone that uses 51% or higher. And most of those countries happen to be in sub-Saharan Africa, a couple up in Northern Europe, but you get the idea of where a lot of renewable energy is being used heavily. And then if you go through, you actually get a nice list of countries and economies and their use of renewable energy. So for example, Afghanistan, as of 2014, about 16.75% of their energy came from renewable sources. And if you go through, you can get a good snapshot of what countries are using these. Austria is a heavy user. Australia is not such a heavy user. Belize is a pretty heavy user. Bhutan, extremely heavy user of renewable energies. And so you start to get an idea of, okay, if I was selling things within an industry that might need to use renewable resources, where are some places I could target? It's interesting that Cuba has such a big decrease from the 90s to 2014. Wonder what happened there. If you were to be able to trade with Cuba, that might be a place worth taking a look at. And you, of course, can look and see just how different countries use renewable energies. And as you go through and get all the way down to, say, the United States, that just to give you a feel of its use versus other countries, we're relatively low as far as what percentage of our electricity comes from renewable energies. And what's also nice is they even go and break things down even beyond just countries, and they look at specific economies. So at the very end of this, you can get an idea of what sort of income levels use renewable energy. So countries with high income levels are not using them too much, though there is an increase. And those with low and middle incomes are more likely to use, or more likely to get electricity from renewable energy sources. And so this winds up becoming a really cool little report on renewable energy. And this can then be related to any sort of business that deals in something like that. And this database resource, being free, can be used for just about anything like this, where you have a business venture or endeavor. Well, what parts of the world are actually using the things that you're producing? And so this is really kind of one of the key ways that you could use World Bank. I encourage you to play around in this, as it has access to lots and lots of different data sets, and the best way to kind of learn what's here is just to go to it and look through the different data sets available and see if there's anything that jumps out at you as being particularly interesting. And just remember that it is yet another tool that you can use when it comes to business-related questions. Another free business resource that you will want to be aware of is export.gov. This one is actually not listed on the library's business resources pages, so you will need to try to remember the URL, or at least the name, since the name is also its URL. Export.gov is a site managed by the International Trade Administration that provides government data on all things related to international trade. This could be a great resource to learn about the global importing and exporting of solar panels, for example. You'll search this resource really just with anything that you think is going to be relevant. You can search a specific market, you can search a specific product, you can search countries. Basically, you're just searching to see what might be out there. So I might search solar panels, since my chosen company manufactures solar panels. And what we get back are things that are talking about like solar energy products from Costa Rica. I might want to know what the market size and what the import-export information is in Costa Rica, especially if I want to start exporting my product to there, or if I identified this as being a potential place for, or a potential opportunity for the company that I might be writing about if I were in a business class, for example. And so you can get an idea of what the total market size is in millions of US dollars in Costa Rica, and it's relatively small, $14 million, estimated 15 in Costa Rica. And then you can see what imports within this industry would be from the US. And this is all just things within the solar energy product sector. And so out of that 14 million size of the market, about 3.9 million of that can be accredited to the import from the US. So the US has a decent share of that for the time being. And then you can go back and just see what else is out there. I really like this one on rooftop solar system markets, a comparison of the US and China. China is definitely embracing the manufacturing of solar panels and other parts that have to do with this industry a little bit more than the US so far. So it would be interesting to see what this report happens to say. And you could go through it and just find out. And you can find out some of the impetus for doing things like federal incentives that the US has, and state incentives and all that good stuff. And as you go through, I bet you would find other information about China as well. And so they even have a whole section just on rooftop solar in China, and it has some nice data and analysis to go with that. I realize I didn't spend a lot of time on export.gov or World Bank data for that matter, so I do encourage you to go back and look at those, see what all can be useful, and I do encourage you to remember those as free business-related tools when it comes to working with those types of questions in the future. But I do want to go ahead and move on to news resources. And the resources I will go over in this lecture are Nexus Uni, Factiva, America's News, also known as the News Bank, and Google News. The easiest way to get to these resources is from the Articles and Databases page. Scroll to the bottom and find the link to newspapers and magazines. And if you scroll through this page of newspaper databases, you'll notice that some of the things we've seen that are listed we've already seen before, namely Nexus Uni and Factiva. This is because both of these databases have both news items as well as business information. So we're definitely going to look at those. And we'll start with Nexus Uni. You may have remembered this being called LexisNexis Academic, and to law students it will forever be called Lexis or LexisNexis because they have a slightly different version. But for us, we have Nexus Uni, and we can click into it, and we'll have full access once we log in. And I'm already logged in, but you will have had to do that at some point along this research process. So starting with Nexus Uni, this is a database that provides access to a lot of different material types, including legal information, company profiles, and of course news. The news coverage here is vast and covers both big national titles like the New York Times, Washington Post, as well as international newspapers, and even very specific news sets like the Campus Newswire, which is a service for college newspapers, including, in fact, the Daily Gamecock. So let's see what we can do with Nexus Uni. If you were still at the point where you wanted more company info, like I mentioned before, you could choose company info and enter in your chosen company. We're going to skip that for this since we've already gotten it, and the company profile stuff here is very similar to what you'll see in Hoover's. And so for the sake of this lecture, let's focus on news items. So within Nexus Uni, it's actually quite simple to get started. I could easily just come over to what are you interested in and say I'm interested in news on the company First Solar Inc. And so I could come in and I could go ahead and search First Solar as a phrase and see what kind of stuff I might find. And I've gotten tons of stuff, and I get mostly things from what look like potentially industry trade publications. So potential First Solar trade targets. Crossmark Global Holdings Incorporated buys new position in First Solar. So we got a lot of articles about investments and things about prospects that are kind of more industry related. We're not getting a lot from, say, New York Times or really anything that is sort of a recognizable national news source. So we could actually tell it that that's what we want to do, though. So we could easily go back and change up our search just a little bit. And so one thing I do want you to know about is the advanced search options within Nexus Uni, because there are different ways of searching within this particular database. And so one thing you can do is just kind of take a look at this, at what they're even doing with this advanced search. You start by searching everything, and that's going to search all that legal information, those company profiles, all that stuff. So you may not want that at this point. You might want, in fact, something much different. And so you can tell it, okay, I want to select a specific content type. And in this case, I think we would probably go with news. And so we can select news, and that's what we're doing. Advanced search, news, great. And you see it's changed up in advanced search just a little bit. And other things you can do here is you can also say, okay, I actually want my search to only search within a particular publication. So if you scroll down, you can actually find publication. So I can say, well, I really just am interested in what if anything, the New York Times has published about First Solar Incorporated. And then from there you can look at the different ways that you can search. So you can search for all of the terms, so it's the more natural language, just kind of keywords, almost like Google. You can do search any of these terms, where that's sort of similar. And then you also have phrase searching, where it's going to put it in the quotes. And that's what I'm going to do here. I want to find that exact phrase, First Solar, in whatever publication, in anything that may have been published by the New York Times. So I'm going to run that search and see what I get. I actually get a lot of stuff. So on our radar, Solar Venture misses loan deadline from 2011. Could or could not be relevant, but I actually might want to resort my results here And Nexus Uni, typically, unless you've played around with your settings, it will probably default to sorting by relevance, but you can say, well, I actually want the newest stuff first. And then you can find things that might be a little bit newer. So ruling on solar imports sets up a test for Trump. That could be a really relevant article about First Solar. There's another one called Battle Over Solar Trade from July of this past year, where it looks like it's a column from the business financial section that talks specifically about the solar industry, and it looks even more specific to talking about the different companies within that industry, First Solar being one of them. And so the things to remember about LexisNexis, especially as far as news go, are that it's huge in its scope, and that it has lots of the bigger national news items as well as international news items. But the bonus about Nexus Uni is that everything here is going to be full text. So anytime you see something, you're just going to click it. You've got the full article right there. Then you can print it, you can download it, you can do whatever you want with it, because at that point it is in fact yours. So at this point I'd like to go ahead and move on to Factiva. And Factiva can be found on the same page there at the bottom of what is called the top databases. And Factiva is somewhat like Nexus Uni, also does lots of different things. It's not just a news source. It also has company profiles. It has lots of stock information, as you might expect from something that's published by Dow Jones. And so there's a lot of things within here other than just newspaper articles. It is, however, the only place that we have access to the Wall Street Journal from. In fact, if you ever have someone, or you yourself, that needs, like, say, today's Wall Street Journal, or is wanting to access an article from today's Wall Street Journal, Factiva's homepage. So if I change the view box here to show the top bar, you'll see when you click into the link, it takes you to the search page. But if you click on the homepage for Factiva, it's interesting because it's actually just the front page of the Wall Street Journal for today. And that's always how it's going to be. But we can obviously search this, and we don't necessarily have to search just within Wall Street Journal, but we will do that as well. And so what I might actually do is, instead of just doing a search for First Solar Inc., I actually am interested in seeing if there's anything for First Solar Inc. within the Wall Street Journal, because I wouldn't have had that coverage in Nexus Uni. So I can go ahead and do a search for First Solar Inc., and I might come back and play with that, especially that Inc. element within the search. We'll see how this goes. But once I enter a search term, I can go ahead and search it. However, there's some weird things about Factiva and their defaults. One is it defaults to search things within the last 3 months. Unless you just know that that's relevant, you might want to change that a little bit. I like to open it up to at least a year, but obviously you have plenty of options there depending on your needs. But if I'm looking for news items on, say, First Solar Inc., maybe I'll do a year. And if I wanted to search just within Wall Street Journal, actually I have to tell it that. So I can click on this little arrow for all next to all sources, and then what it does is it gives me a search box, and what I can do then is say, okay, I want the Wall Street Journal, and it'll autofill. There's lots of different versions of Wall Street Journal, which is interesting. There's a Chinese language one, there's online only, and then of course Wall Street Journal. I tend to do the all sources just to make sure I'm capturing as much as possible. And we've got our date range already, and we've got our search term, so we can click search. And not a ton, but a few things. First Solar swings to loss on restructuring charges. Ooh, not the best news, but a really relevant article nonetheless. And there's a few others that could be relevant, especially things that are mentioning their problems. So that could deter a lot of these, especially things like First Solar to cut more than a quarter of staff. Solar panel maker expects $500 million in charges. So not only do you get an idea of what's out there in Wall Street Journal, but you sort of started even getting an idea of what types of things Wall Street Journal is reporting on. So they're reporting on anything that happens within a company that might influence its outcomes over the next year or so. And I think that's pretty well reflected in the small amount of results here. I could easily go back to my search in Factiva, take out the Wall Street Journal part, set a more open date range, search for Solar Inc., and be able to find way more things. I just wanted to show you how you can target in on a specific source, like in this example, the Wall Street Journal. Another newspaper resource that you have access to through the Thomas Cooper Library is America's Newsbank. And this one is a little bit different than what we've looked at so far, in that it provides access mostly to localized newspapers, like think the state newspaper, the Charleston Courier, the Greenville News, that kind of stuff. So what could be really useful in this scenario is, since we found out that the headquarters of First Solar Incorporated is Tempe, Arizona, maybe we want to see what Arizona newspapers have to say about this particular company. So we could click straight into Arizona, and then anything that we search within this is going to just be searching the Arizona newspapers that are listed here. And if for some reason you were in a situation where there was one specific newspaper that you wanted to look through within this, you could certainly click one, and that would allow you to search within that particular publication as well. But we'll go ahead and do all the stuff that might be found within Arizona newspapers, and right off the bat we start to see what we've got. And we've got one that mentions First Solar Inc. that's really just about, looks like it's talking about stocks. We've got one that might be irrelevant, and then as we get to about number 4 and even number 6, we start to see things about First Solar announcing third quarter financial results. And we could take a look and see how this Arizona newspaper, the Arizona Daily Star, is reporting information about First Solar's third quarter financial results. And America's News is another one like Nexus Uni where all the articles are full text. So once you find something you like, just click it. You'll have the full article right there. And finally, another good source that you can use freely is Google News. Google has developed a really good index for news stories at news.google.com. So you can do a search for a company in this scenario, for example, and do First Solar Inc. And this is also good for if you're searching for a topic and you use Google, and I were to do First Solar Inc., for example, in Google, I would probably get their website and some other information going, just talking straight about the company. I might not get news items. The news.google.com gives you just news items, which is really nice. And so the main things to remember, though, is one, if you find things, just remember you're clicking out to whatever that source might be. So USA Commerce Daily has this article. So I'm linking out to this article. If I have access to it through here, great. I can look at it. I can evaluate it. I can do whatever I need to do from this page. However, there may be instances where you do a Google News search and you wind up hitting a paywall, and that's just simply because that particular title wants you to have a subscription in order to read that article. That's where our newspaper databases could come in handy. And if you copy down or make a citation for whatever article is that you're trying to do, you could go to some of the resources we've looked at, specifically Nexus Uni, perhaps Factiva if it's Wall Street Journal, which they have a lot of paywalls, so I would expect that to happen a lot if you're finding things from Wall Street Journal. And you could go in there, search for the article, and get full access through the subscriptions that the library pays for. Okay, so now you should know how to access a nice selection of newspaper resources. Now you should know how to access a nice selection of business databases and news databases that will help with scenarios involving business research queries. Thanks so much for viewing this lecture. If you have any questions at all for me, please contact me at applingm@mailbox.sc.edu. Thanks.